On the evening of September 28, 2025, the skies over western Russia ignited in chaos. What began as a swarm of Ukrainian drones evolved into one of the most complex deception operations in modern warfare. Behind the chaos, two M140 HIMARS batteries executed a precision strike on Belgorod's thermal power plant, the nerve center powering Russia's military logistics in the region. Within minutes, radar networks, command posts, and railways went dark. It was not just a blackout, but the collapse of a doctrine, proving that in the age of precision warfare, even the homeland is no longer safe. Could this single strike mark the turning point of the entire war? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest frontline analyses. September 28, 2025, exactly 6:34 p.m., in Russia's Western Border Defense Network, the screens in multiple command centers suddenly flared crimson. The alarms didn't originate from a single source. They erupted simultaneously across three oblasts: Kursk, Belgorod, and Bryansk. Within seconds, operators realized this was not a localized drone intrusion, but a synchronized large-scale air incursion designed to overload the entire Western defense grid. Two M142 HIMARS batteries, positioned just behind civilian settlements north of Kharkiv, had already rolled into firing stance. From Ukrainian territory, waves of low and medium-altitude aerial objects were advancing deep into Russian airspace. These were not ordinary FPV drones. They were UJ-26 Bober ER and Sheila 400 long-range kamikaze drones, each armed with 30 to 50 kilogram high-explosive warheads. Their dispersed formation and variable flight altitudes made them difficult to track, while their swarm behavior generated radar clutter that mimicked a multi-vector missile attack. Russian Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2 air defense batteries in the region immediately opened fire. The night sky turned into a storm of tracer fire and missile trails, the horizon flickering with successive detonations. On the control center monitors, every interception registered as a victory. Each explosion logged, each kill announced. Within minutes, Russian officers believed they had successfully repelled the attack. The airspace appeared secure. Systems were functioning. Morale was high. Yet this apparent success was an illusion, the first act of a complex, multi-layered deception operation. While Russian operators focused on the chaotic swarm in the lower atmosphere, the true threat was silently descending from above. At the height of the engagement, 6 new high-speed radar signatures suddenly appeared on the Belgorod sector's early warning display. Unlike the slow, erratic drone tracks, these signatures plunged vertically from the upper atmosphere at supersonic velocity over Mach 2.5. The command center fell silent. These were not UAVs. These were M31 GMLRS rockets, launched from the M142 HIMARS system, a different species of weapon entirely. The Russian commander ordered immediate activation of the S-400 Triumph system, their most advanced and closely guarded air defense asset, concealed until that moment. The 92 N6E Gravestone radar powered up, sweeping the skies with an enormous pulse of electromagnetic energy. Within seconds, it locked onto the 6 inbound targets. 648 N6DM interceptor missiles erupted from their canisters at Mach 6, streaking upward in white-hot arcs. Moments later, 6 explosions blossomed high in the stratosphere. The intercept operator's voice broke the silence. All targets destroyed. Direct hits. 6 ballistic threats neutralized. Relief swept through the control center. They had stopped a complex multi-vector assault, but far to the west, in an underground Ukrainian command post, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no disappointment. The first phase of the plan had gone exactly as intended. Hours earlier, Ukrainian planners had executed one of the largest and most coordinated drone offensives in the war. Hundreds of UAVs had been dispatched toward 8 Russian regions: Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Tula, Yaroslavl, Rostov, Novgorod, and Samara. Their true objective was not destruction but distraction, to overwhelm radar networks, deplete missile inventories, and occupy command bandwidth across 1,000 kilometers of airspace. While Russian operators celebrated their apparent success, they were already ensnared in an electronic ambush. Every missile fired, every radar beam redirected, was part of a grand deception. At the core of this strategy lay a single target, the Belgorodskaya Tidets thermal power plant, located about 90 kilometers north of Kharkiv. Open-source intelligence and satellite imagery had identified it as the systemic center of gravity for the region's energy and military command infrastructure. The plant supplied power to the 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, one of Russia's most battle-hardened formations, responsible for operations along the eastern Ukrainian front. Its importance meant it was heavily defended, precisely why it was chosen. In the Ukrainian bunker, an electronic warfare officer monitored a faint but distinctive signal. "Target acquired," he said calmly. "We have the exact coordinates, operating frequency, and output strength of the S-400 radar. Send the second salvo. Fire at will." What the Russians had just destroyed in the upper atmosphere were not warheads. They were the most expensive decoys in modern warfare. Those 6 HIMARS-launched rockets, worth nearly $6 million in total, had served their purpose perfectly to force the hidden S-400 battery to reveal its position and unique radar signature. The first strike had not failed. It had succeeded by exposing the heart of the enemy's defense. The S-400's coordinates, signal frequency, and electronic fingerprint were instantly transmitted to another HIMARS battery waiting in silent readiness and to a formation of heavy UJ-26 bomber drones still loitering near the border. The second act of the operation was about to begin, the real attack. At 1846, a different Ukrainian launch site came alive. 6 more M31 GMLRS rockets were fired in rapid succession, each programmed for a precision strike on the Belgorodskaya TETS facility. The timing was surgically calculated. The S-400 system, still recalibrating after its previous engagement, was momentarily vulnerable, its radar array temporarily offline in a cooling and realignment phase, lasting less than a minute. But that was all Ukraine needed. Inside the Russian command center, the first signs of the new attack appeared as another cluster of high-altitude radar returns, 6 sharp descending tracks. Panic replaced confidence. Another wave inbound, shouted an operator. Alarms blared. The S-400 crew scrambled to re-engage, but the radar was still in its critical blind spot. Meanwhile, the nearby Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2 batteries remained preoccupied, swatting at the relentless drones still filling the lower atmosphere. The decoy storm was working to perfection. As the new HIMARS missiles raced toward their targets, a low-flying Bober drone suddenly broke from its holding pattern. It skimmed treetop level, then rose sharply and dove straight toward the S-400 command vehicle, the nerve center housing the radar control module. The massive Gravestone radar, optimized for detecting high-speed aerial threats, could not lock onto such a small, low-profile object at close range. The surrounding short-range systems were too saturated to respond. For just a few seconds, an invisible gap opened in Russia's air defense envelope. The Bobber struck the radar command module directly, detonating its 40-kilogram warhead. The impact obliterated the radar interface. The eyes of the S-400 went dark. Less than 30 seconds remained before the incoming GMLRS missiles reached their terminal dive. This time, there would be no interception. At 1847, 6 HIMARS rockets descended at supersonic speed, each guided by GPS and inertial navigation with a circular error probability under 5 meters. They slammed into the Belgorod thermal power plant's main transformer yard. The result was catastrophic. The 90-kilogram unitary warheads ruptured high-voltage transformers, vaporizing steel and copper. Electric arcs flashed like lightning across the grid, turning night into day. In an instant, the entire regional power network collapsed. The strike did not merely destroy a facility, it blinded an entire military district. Radars, communications nodes, and railway signaling systems lost power simultaneously. Command posts went silent. Trains carrying fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements ground to a halt. The attack severed the arteries of a war machine with surgical precision. When the last HIMARS warhead detonated, the shockwave rippled across Belgorod like a seismic pulse. The city's skyline flickered once, then vanished into absolute darkness. Streetlights, radar stations, and communications towers all went silent within seconds. What Ukraine had achieved was not simply the destruction of a target, it was the paralysis of a system. The Belgorodskaya TETS plant had powered the eyes, ears, and nervous system of the Russian military presence in the region. In one surgical strike, that network ceased to function. The blackout spread like a chain reaction. Backup lines tripped, transformers overloaded, and substations across the oblast collapsed one after another. The loss of the thermal plant didn't just cut power, it set off a cascading failure across interconnected grids. Within minutes, even facilities miles away began shutting down as voltage levels plummeted. Inside the command bunkers of Russia's 20th Guards Combined Arms Army, screens went dark, encrypted radios died, and emergency generators struggled to maintain basic operations. Civilian infrastructure was hit equally hard. Belgorod, a city of 500,000 people, was plunged into chaos. Traffic lights failed, intersections jammed, and accidents blocked major roads. Elevators stopped mid-ascent, trapping people inside. Water pumps ceased operation, cutting off supply to entire districts. Shops that relied on electronic transactions reverted to cash-only sales, creating long queues and rising panic. Gas stations ran out of generator fuel. Supermarkets were stormed by crowds trying to stock up before the situation worsened. By midnight, Belgorod was a city without light, order, or control. For the Russian Defense Ministry, the timing was catastrophic. Even as state media triumphantly claimed that 230 Ukrainian drones had been shot down, local officials were reporting something else entirely. At 7:07 p.m., the governor of Belgorod, Vyacheslav Gladkov, issued a brief, nervous statement. A critical infrastructure facility has been attacked. There are serious power outages. Within minutes, the Kremlin's narrative began to unravel. Satellite data from NASA's firm's thermal anomaly system confirmed what civilians on the ground were already recording. Massive fires raging at the exact coordinates of the Belgorod thermal power plant. Amateur videos flooded Telegram, showing plumes of smoke and arcs of electric fire rising into the night. Russian media tried to frame it as an industrial malfunction, but the truth was undeniable. A single precision strike had achieved what months of conventional fighting could not: the complete disruption of a key Russian logistical hub deep within its own territory. In Kiev's underground command center, Ukrainian officers observed the satellite feed in silence. The mission had reached its final phase. Over 200 drones, a dozen HIMARS rockets, and an enormous amount of coordination had served one purpose: to ensure that just a handful of precision-guided munitions reached their mark. It was, in every sense, a military symphony, chaotic, deceptive, and devastatingly effective. This operation did more than destroy a power station. It dismantled the myth of Russian invulnerability. For years, Russian military doctrine had been built around one core principle: keeping the war beyond its borders. The Belgorod strike shattered that assumption. In the era of long-range precision warfare, distance no longer guaranteed safety. A rocket fired from Kharkiv could now reach the infrastructure that sustained Russia's frontline operations. The psychological impact was immense. Russian soldiers on the Eastern Front, accustomed to fighting under the cover of robust logistics and communications, now faced uncertainty. The message was clear: nowhere was safe. The war had crossed a threshold, erasing the concept of a rear area. To understand the genius of the operation, one must consider the target itself. The Belgorodskaya TETS plant was not just an energy facility, it was the systemic center of gravity for the entire Western logistics corridor. It powered the radar arrays that monitored Ukrainian airspace, the S-300 and S-400 systems that shielded supply depots, and the encrypted communications that linked command posts to field units. The destruction of this node severed those connections, reducing a sophisticated military network into isolated, powerless fragments. Generators did exist, of course, but they could not sustain high-energy systems like rotating radar arrays or long-range satellite uplinks. Within hours, Russian commanders were forced to operate using paper maps, civilian cell phones, and unencrypted radio tools that belonged to a previous century. Intelligence streams from the front lines were cut. Situational awareness dropped to near zero. The Russian army, for a moment, had been thrust back into the analog age. The industrial impact was equally severe. Factories in and around Belgorod that had been converted for wartime production, ammunition plants, vehicle repair workshops, and component manufacturers fell silent. Facilities like the Kurachevsky electromechanical plant in the Bryansk region, a major producer of electrical connectors and control systems for armored vehicles, ground to a halt. Conveyor belts stopped mid-cycle, robotic arms froze, and machines pressing artillery shells went cold. Modern production depends on stable energy, and generator output could not sustain the precision tolerances of CNC machines or the heat requirements of foundries. Every hour of downtime meant hundreds fewer shells, dozens fewer repaired vehicles, and entire shipments of munitions delayed or lost. The power outage was not just an inconvenience, it was a weaponized disruption of Russia's war economy. But the most critical collapse occurred in the railway network, the steel backbone of Russian logistics. The Belgorod junction connected interior Russia to Donbass and Crimea via Rostov in the south. These electrified lines carried ammunition, fuel, and troops in constant rotation. When the power grid failed, signaling systems froze, switches jammed, and trains halted mid-route. Entire convoys of fuel tankers and troop transports were stranded in Belgorod's dark rail yards. In less than an hour, Russia's logistics architecture in the Western theater had imploded. All of this was achieved with fewer than a dozen precision weapons and a few hundred kilograms of explosives. Ukraine had turned Russia's own infrastructure into its vulnerability. By forcing Moscow to expend vast amounts of interceptor ammunition, reveal radar sites, and exhaust command resources, Ukraine managed to inflict disproportionate strategic damage at minimal cost. The operation's brilliance lay in its economy of force and layered deception. 6 HIMARS rockets were knowingly sacrificed in the first salvo, decoys worth roughly $170,000 each, to provoke the activation of the S-400 and expose its location. Once that system was blinded and neutralized, the second wave struck with impunity. The cost-benefit ratio was staggering. For less than $10 million in total expenditure, Ukraine disabled a regional energy grid, disrupted frontline logistics, and forced Russia to redeploy critical air defense systems away from the battlefield. Moscow now faced an impossible choice. It could either protect its border cities or its troops in occupied territory, but not both. Each S-400 or Pantsir battery moved north to guard Belgorod, or Kursk opened a new gap in the frontline shield over Donetsk, Zaporizhia, or Crimea. The Belgorod strike was therefore not just a tactical victory, but a strategic reconfiguration of the battlefield. It demonstrated that modern warfare is no longer decided by tank brigades or artillery duels alone, but by intelligence, synchronization, and psychological dominance. By combining electronic warfare, decoy operations, and precision strikes into a single orchestration, Ukraine had rewritten the rules
examples of 21st century conflict. The war was no longer confined to trenches and front lines. It was fought in power grids, radar frequencies, and data streams. When the fires in Belgorod finally burned out, the lights in Moscow were still on, but a new reality had dawned. The Kremlin's most powerful systems had been used against themselves, their strength turned into weakness. It was a masterclass in modern asymmetry, a war won not by brute force, but by calculated intelligence and precision. The aftermath of the Belgorod strike extended far beyond the blackout zone. Its true impact was doctrinal, a blow to the very foundation of Russian military strategy. For decades, Moscow's defense posture relied on maintaining distance. Wars were to be fought outside Russian borders, with layered air defenses protecting critical depth. On September 28, 2025, that illusion collapsed. Ukraine had demonstrated that geography was no longer protection, and that precision, not proximity, determined power. A single coordinated operation had reached deep into Russian territory and neutralized assets once considered untouchable. In military terms, the Belgorod strike erased the line between front and rear, a revelation that reverberated through every echelon of the Russian command structure. Strategically, the Kremlin faced a dilemma with no clean solution. To shield its cities and infrastructure, it had to pull advanced systems like S-400, Pantsir S-1, and Tor M2 batteries away from the front. But each unit withdrawn weakened protection for Russian forces entrenched in occupied zones. Every defense gained at home became a vulnerability at the front. The Belgorod operation forced Russia to defend everything, and thus defend nothing perfectly. The psychological effect was equally profound. The myth of the invulnerable homeland, reinforced for years through propaganda, was shattered. Civilians in Belgorod now experienced the kind of fear once reserved for frontline soldiers. For commanders, it was a revelation that technology and precision could turn any rear base into a battlefield. In global military analysis, this operation became a case study in 21st century asymmetric warfare. It showed how a smaller force, through intelligence integration and electronic deception, could exploit a larger adversary's rigidity. The use of expendable HIMARS decoys to trigger the S-400, the sequencing of drone swarms to mask radar signatures, and the synchronization of EW interception with kinetic strikes, all of it illustrated a new model of warfare built on tempo, timing, and data. Within NATO and other Western think tanks, the Belgorod strike was dissected as a blueprint of distributed precision. It proved that complex defense architectures could be neutralized not by overwhelming firepower, but by forcing them to reveal their logic. The moment the S-400 radar transmitted its signal, its secrecy, its greatest strength became its fatal flaw. For Ukraine, the attack was more than tactical revenge. It was a message. It declared that the era of impunity inside Russian borders was over. For Russia, it marked the beginning of a long and costly adaptation, a recognition that its adversary had learned how to fight in dimensions beyond the visible battlefield. In the smoking remains of the Belgorodskaya Tets, amid the silent transformers and burned copper, one lesson was unmistakable. In modern war, the most powerful weapon is information, and the side that controls perception, timing, and precision no longer needs to match strength for strength. The Belgorod operation, September 28, 2025, will be remembered not merely as a strike, but as the moment when Ukraine transformed asymmetric defense into a strategic art form, turning deception, coordination, and intelligence into decisive firepower.